Hello and welcome. Let's continue with histology. Let's move on to connective tissue now. And when we go through and we talk connective tissue, here we'll go through and we'll see connective tissue is going to be the most abundant and widely distributed of the primary tissues. It's the most abundant and widely distributed of the primary tissues. There are four main classes and four subclasses of connective tissue. Now, the main classes will include number one, you have what we call connective tissue proper, CT proper. All right, so number one will be connective tissue proper. Number two then we'll have cartilage. I'll abbreviate that with CART for cartilage. Number three then we'll see is going to be bone. It's not easy to write with this pen they give us. And then number four, we have blood. Okay, so again, the main classes are connective tissue proper. When we talk connective tissue proper, this includes fat and fibrous tissue of our ligaments. And number two, we have cartilage. Then we have bone. And then fourth, we have blood. Now, when we go through and we talk, connective tissue, first let's talk general locations. Now, when we talk general locations, you'll see it's found almost everywhere in the body. However, its quantities are going to vary depending on the organ that we're checking out. We'll see, for example, skin. Skin is going to consist primarily of connective tissue, while the brain we'll see is going to contain very little connective tissue. Now, when we go through and we talk general functions, here we can appreciate some general functions. We could see connective tissue is going to do more than just connect, like I mentioned to you guys before. It'll also be responsible for binding organs, supporting organs, protecting our organs. It'll provide both physical protection and immune protection. Insulating, heat production we can see there. Movement, storage of reserve fuel, right? We have adipocytes here. Fat gets broken down thanks to cellular respiration. And then transporting substances. So all general functions, but we'll see specifically when it comes to each specific connective tissue there, like we saw with epithelial tissue. Now, some common characteristics that I'd like to mention to you guys. The first is that all connective tissues are going to arise from mesenchyme. All connective tissues will arise from mesenchyme. Mesenchyme is an embryonic tissue. It's an embryonic tissue. So when we talk characteristics, there's three characteristics that are going to set connective tissues apart from other primary tissues. First you have is that connective tissues arise from mesenchyme. Connective tissues have a common origin. They all arise from mesenchyme. Mesenchyme is an embryonic tissue. Second is the degree of vascularity. The second characteristic is the degree of vascularity. When we talk connective tissues, they'll have a varying degree of vascularity. Some are going to be highly vascular, while others will be poorly vascular. And then you'll see cartilage will be avascular. like dense connective tissues, will be poorly vascular. And then avascular, we'll see cartilage. Now, the third common characteristic here we'll see is going to be, that's going to be found in relation to connective tissues, is that they have an extracellular matrix. An extracellular matrix is going to be a collection of extracellular molecules that are secreted by the cells. And this extracellular matrix is basically the non-living main component of connective tissue. It separates the living cells of the tissue. It also allows connective tissue to bear weight and to withstand great tension. And then last, it allows it to endure abuse. This extracellular matrix is made up, it's made up of ground substance and fibers. It's made up of ground substance and fibers. And here we'll go through and we'll check all that stuff out. So when we talk about the structural elements of connective tissue, first we'll see connective tissue fibers, and we have the ground substance, as we mentioned. So when we go through and we look at the structural elements, here we'll see first ground substance. Excuse me. Now when we talk ground substance is basically this backdrop. Ground substance is an unstructured material. It is an unstructured material. And this ground substance fills the space between the cells, and it contains the fibers. This ground substance is composed of interstitial fluid, cell adhesion proteins, and also proteoglycans. That's what the ground substance, you'll see, is going to be composed of. Now, we can see it contains, we said, connective tissue fibers, and these connective tissue fibers, they're going to be responsible for providing support. And there's three types that I'd like you to be familiar with. The first type we have are our collagen fibers. Here you can see the thick fibers, the nice and thick fibers here, the collagen fibers. Now, when we talk collagen fibers, these collagen fibers are the strongest and most abundant fiber type. And they're constructed of collagen. And what they do is they provide tensile strength. They provide the organ with tensile strength. That's basically the ability to resist being pulled apart. And they are rope-like fibers. They are rope-like fibers. And again, here you can appreciate all these collagen fibers right inside of here. Okay. Next, then we have our elastic fibers. Now, when we talk about our elastic fibers are long, thin fibers. They are long, thin fibers, and they form branching networks. So they're long, thin fibers that form branching networks. And they're going to contain this rubber-like protein that we call elastin. They will contain this rubber-like protein that we call elastin. Now, this protein elastin is going to allow these fibers to stretch. It'll allow them to stretch and recoil. It'll allow them to stretch and then recoil, basically come back to their resting length. So they're like rubber bands, the elastic fibers are. So here you can see them in kind of this orange. Here, lighter orange because they're in, a deeper state. They're in a deeper place. Now, when we talk elastic fibers, they're going to be found where greater elasticity is needed. They're going to be found where greater elasticity is needed. For example, the skin, the lungs, and then the walls of our blood vessels. The third fiber type then are our reticular fibers. Now, when we talk reticular fibers, you can see here in blue, these reticular fibers are short, fine, collagenous fibers. And they form delicate networks around small blood vessels. And they support soft tissue of our organs. They'll be responsible for providing support to the soft tissue of the organs. Now, when we go through and we talk reticular fibers, they're going to be found in basement membrane of epithelia. They're found in the basement membrane of epithelia and also around capillaries. Excuse me. Next, then, let's move to the major cell types. So let's talk connective tissue cells. When we talk connective tissue cells, let's check out the major cell types. And here I want you to know you have immature and you have mature cells. When we talk immature cells, your immature cells are undifferentiated cells. They are undifferentiated cells indicated by the suffix blast or blasts with the S. So blast. I'm going to teach you guys medical terminology in here as well. If you take medical terminology after this class, which is what 95% of you guys usually do, you should get an A in there. If not, I'm going to kind of haunt you there. So blasts or blasts. Now these are actively mitotic cells, these immature cells. Now the primary blast cell type by class are going to include, now here you can write down, number one will be for connective tissue proper, we'll have fibroblasts. Fibroblasts. And then for cartilage, when we talk cartilage, we'll see we have chondroblasts. Chondroblasts. Third, then we have osteoblast. For bone, we have osteoblast. And then number four, for blood, we have hemocytoblast. Hemocytoblast. Then when we talk mature form, the mature form is going to be indicated by the suffix cyte or cyte or cytes. The mature form. Now, the mature form is going to maintain the matrix health, like we've discussed before. There's additional cell types we'll find here as well, and they'll include fat cells, which we already said are called adipocytes. And they store nutrients. Next, then, white blood cells. Our leukocytes. our neutrophils, eosinophils, and lymphocytes. These cells are going to be concerned with tissue response to injury. Along with that, then, we're going to see we have mast cells, and they're going to be responsible for secreting heparin and histamine. So they initiate the inflammatory response via chemicals called heparin, which is an anticoagulant, and histamine, which is going to help to make the capillaries leaky. And also they contain protease, which is basically protein digesting enzymes. And then last we have macrophages. Macrophages, another cell type, they're going to be responsible for eating bacteria, or we can say scientifically phagocytizing, engulfing you can think of. They phagocytize foreign material. So they eat bacteria and debris basically. These are our macrophages. Let's move down to then the type of connective tissue. Now, when we talk type of connective tissue, first here let's talk and let's mention mesenchyme. When we talk mesenchyme, mesenchyme is going to come from the mesoderm. Comes from the mesoderm, one of our embryonic germ layers. We also have endoderm and ectoderm. Though you took Bio 100, you've usually gone through those right before your dissections. In 107, most of you guys don't usually know that. So ectoderm, endoderm, and mesoderm, let's make sure we've got those down. So mesenchyme is going to come from mesoderm. And mesenchyme is an embryonic tissue. It's an embryonic tissue. It arises during the early weeks of embryonic development and eventually differentiates into all other connective tissue cells. Now, when we go through and we talk types of connective tissue, the first type of connective tissue that we'll talk about is connective tissue proper. Connective tissue proper has two subclasses. And those two subclasses include number one, loose connective tissue. When we talk our loose connective tissues, this includes areolar, as we see here in this picture. It'll also include adipose, which we'll look at in a few seconds. And it will also include reticular connective tissue. So, again, connective tissue proper has two subclasses, loose connective tissues and dense connective tissues. When we talk dense connective tissues are going to include dense regular, dense irregular, and elastic connective tissue. And you can see, except for bone, cartilage, and blood, all mature connective tissues are connective tissue proper. So let's look at our loose connective tissues, and let's start with areolar connective tissue. Now, same thing, you have to be able to describe it, know the function and locations. So when we talk description, this connective tissue is going to have a gel-like matrix. All three fiber types will be present. However, we cannot see the reticular fibers. We can only see the elastic fibers and the collagen fibers is all we can see. Fibroblasts, the first type of cell that we're going to be able to find here, and you can appreciate their nuclei here. We have some macrophages we can appreciate here. We're not going to be able to see mast cells, and then also some white blood cells that we mentioned. Now, when we talk about the function, of areolar connective tissue before we actually jump to the function, when we describe it, I like to describe it as spaghetti and meatballs. Spaghetti are all the different fibers, and then meatballs are basically the nuclei from the fibroblasts. So next then, let's move from description to function. Function is that this tissue is going to wrap and cushion organs. It's also involved with supporting and binding. It stores nutrients. Its macrophages are going to phagocytize bacteria. It plays an important role in inflammation. And it also holds and conveys tissue fluid. It holds and it conveys tissue fluid. Now, when we talk location, you'll see this type of tissue is going to be found widely distributed under the epithelia of our body. For example, it forms the lamina propria of our mucous membranes. It's also going to, as we described, package organs. And it surrounds capillaries. Next, then we can move over and we can check out then, you've got more images there. Adipose. Now, when we talk adipose tissue, first, let's talk description. The matrix here is similar as areolar. However, it's much more sparse. These cells are going to be closely packed. You can see they're closely packed cells. And we describe the nuclei to be pushed to the periphery. Why are they pushed to the periphery? Because inside of the adipocyte is what you're going to find the lipid drop. So the fat goes in and it pushes everything off to the side and it takes over the center. So these cells are described as a diamond ring sometimes. Right up here is the diamond, the nucleus is, and then here's the ring. Same thing here, you can see. So an adipocyte, one fat cell, another one, another one, another one, another one, another one, another one. They're varying size, all depending on how much lipid they have. Now, the function of adipose tissue is to provide reserve food fuel. It also insulates against heat loss. And it supports and it protects our organs. Where do we find adipose? Adipose is going to be found located underneath the skin in a region that we call the hypodermis. So it's under the skin. It doesn't make up skin. I never said that. It's under the skin. Also going to be found around our kidneys and our eyeballs. Also within the abdomen and inside of breasts. Now we also have what we call brown adipose tissue. Now brown adipose tissue is going to contain an abundant amount of mitochondria. and it is used to help warm the body. And it's used to help warm the body. Brown fat's going to be found in the back of babies. It's found in the back of babies because you'll see they lack the ability to produce heat by shivering. They lack the ability to produce heat by shivering. Next thing we can see more pictures of adipose. Next thing we have what we call reticular connective tissue. Reticular connective tissue. When we talk reticular connective tissue, it's going to be described as a network of reticular fibers. You can see here all these fibers. It's a network of reticular fibers that are going to be found in a typical loose ground substance. And these reticular cells are going to be found lying on the network. They're going to be found lying on the network. So when you talk function of this tissue is basically coming down to the fibers. The fibers, what they do is they form an internal skeleton, a stroma. And that internal skeleton, it supports other cell types, including, more importantly, white blood cells, macrophages, and mast cells. So WBCs, mast cells, and macrophages. So they're basically sitting around there, ready to go. As soon as something comes by, they're going to go and attack. So they're just using those fibers to kind of hang out on, okay, for some support. And then as soon as something comes through that shouldn't be there, they're able to take off, excuse me, after it and mount an attack. So where are we going to find this type of tissue? This type of tissue is going to be found in our lymphoid organs, such as lymph nodes, our bone marrow, and our spleen will contain reticular connective tissue. Next, then, let's check out our dense connective tissue. Let's check out our dense connective tissue. Now, when we talk dense connective tissue, the first type we have here is dense regular connective tissue. Now, dense regular connective tissue is described as being a connective tissue that has basically a parallel arrangement of collagen fibers. So here you see all of these nice basically arranged collagen fibers. So these are all collagen fibers. And then here you can see fibroblast nuclei, fibroblast nuclei, fibroblast nuclei, fibroblast nuclei, fibroblast nuclei. And that space there is basically just this tissue being separated, and then you've got the backdrop kind of there. Now, what is the function of this tissue? This tissue, it attaches muscle to bones, also attaches muscle to muscle, and attaches bone to bone. It's going to withstand great tensile stress when that stress, that pulling force, is applied in just one direction. If it gets applied in multiple directions, it could cause this ligament or tendon to tear. So where do we find this type of tissue? In tendons, ligaments, and also in our aponeuroses. Next, then we have dense irregular. Now, when we talk dense irregular, we can see here now, is going to, dense irregular is going to have an irregularly arranged pattern of collagen fibers. They're not in a nice parallel arrangement as we just saw. So they're all basically in a haphazard arrangement. And then we've got fibroblast nuclei in here too, you can appreciate. Now when you talk function This type of tissue is able to withstand tension exerted in many directions. It's able to withstand tension exerted in many directions. It also provides structural strength. It also helps to provide structural strength. So when you talk locations of where it's found, the fibrous capsules of our organs and of our joints, it's going to be found in the fibrous capsules of our organs and our joints. It's also going to be found in the dermis of the skin, and also the submucosa of the digestive tract, and also in the submucosa of the digestive tract. Next, then we have elastic connective tissue. So the third type then is elastic connective tissue. And then we'll move over from connective tissue proper to basically cartilage. So yeah, then we'll move over to cartilage. So now here when we talk elastic connective tissue is described as looking like dense regular connective tissue. It's going to contain a high proportion, you can see, of elastic fibers. Okay? However, it's going to contain a high proportion of elastic fibers. See all these nice elastic fibers in here. Now, these elastic fibers, what they're going to do is they're going to allow this basically tissue to recoil. So they allow for the recoiling of tissues after stretching. They also are going to help maintain the pulsatile flow of blood through our arteries. And they're going to aid in the passive recoil of our lungs following inspiration. They also aid our lungs with the recoiling process after inspiration, because we've got to get the gases out also. Now, where do we find elastic connective tissue? It's going to be found in the walls of our large arteries, also within certain ligaments that are associated with the vertebral column, and then last, within the walls of the bronchial tubes, within the walls of our bronchial tubes. Next up, we have cartilage. When we talk cartilage, there is a variety of each. Basically, here we'll go through and we'll check out. There's three types. And when we talk cartilage here, you can see some characteristics in relation to cartilage that are important. And then we'll go through all three types. So let's start here first with hyaline cartilage. Hyaline cartilage is described as being having basically an amorphous but firm matrix. It's got collagen fibers, however, they're not visible. Chondroblasts are going to produce the matrix, and when the chondroblasts mature, we said they become the chondrocytes, and they're going to be found within the lacunae. So when these cells here you can see is a chondrocyte. When this chondrocyte, before it becomes a chondrocyte, it's a chondroblast. And the blast cells are going to be producing the matrix. Now, once it becomes a mature cell, it gets, you can think of this little hollow chamber to chill in. So same thing here you can see. Same thing here you can see. Same thing here and here and here and here and here. Everywhere. So when they mature, they're going to be found lying in the lacunae and they become chondrocytes. They're no longer chondroblasts. What's the function? This type of tissue is going to be responsible for supporting and reinforcing. It also has resilient cushioning properties. And it can resist compressive stress. Now, when we talk location where hyaline cartilage is going to be found, you can see hyaline cartilage is going to be found basically forming most of the embryonic skeleton. So before our bones become bones, they are, you can see, hyaline cartilage. So it forms most of the embryonic skeleton. Also, it's going to be found covering the ends of our long bones where they form joint cavities. Also, it's going to be found, you can see, forming our costal cartilages, helping to attach the ribs to the sternum. Cartilage of our nose, trachea, and the larynx, also hyaline cartilage. Next one we have elastic cartilage. Elastic cartilage. Elastic cartilage is similar to hyaline cartilage. However, you can see there's way more elastic fibers. There are way more elastic fibers. Now, when we talk about the function of elastic cartilage is to maintain the shape of a structure while allowing great flexibility. So, maintaining the shape of a structure while allowing great flexibility. Now, when you talk location, it's going to be found helping to basically support the external ear, the pinna we can see here, and also the epiglottis is going to be made up of elastic cartilage as well. So same thing here. Now we move forward. Here we can see fibrocartilage. Now we talk fibrocartilage, the matrix you can see here is similar to, but less firm than that in hyaline cartilage. Here you can see you've got nice thick collagen fibers that predominate, running kind of like in a parallel fashion. You can see you've got cells and fibers, cells and collagen fibers, right? Now when we talk function, this tissue provides tensile strength with the ability to absorb compressive shock. So this is the more absorber of and provider of compressive shock. So we're going to find this type of tissue you can see in between the vertebra. It's one area where a lot of shock is going to be absorbed. In between the knees, another region. And then the pubic symphysis, where the two hip bones, the coxal bones, come together at the anterior part, is where you have the pubic symphysis. So fibrocartilage, here you can appreciate all three. Then let's talk bone. Now we talk bone. Bone is described as having a hard, calcified matrix. It contains many collagen fibers that are obviously not visible. And it has osteocytes that are going to be found also lying in lacunae. When we talk bone, bone is very well vascularized, right? You break a bone, that's okay. 6 to 8 weeks later, usually, you should be perfectly fine and be able to resume activities. Now, when we talk function, bone supports and also bone protects. You can see there. Also, bone is going to provide basically levers for our muscles to act on and allow for movement to occur. Okay? Stores calcium. Besides calcium, there's other minerals. And also fat being found stored within bone. Marrow inside bone is going to be the site for blood cell formation. The scientific term for blood cell formation is hematopoiesis, as we can see here. Hematopoiesis. Where do we find bone tissue? Right? Hopefully just within bone. Now, when we go through and we talk bone, you can see we have two different types of bone. This is compact bone and we have spongy bone. In the lab, then we'll look at both of those bones there. Spongy bone, we can see there is going to contain hematopoietic tissue. Okay, and compact bone, you can see here, is basically going to contain these central, first we can see here, you've got these osteons. These osteons are going to be basically the structural units of bone. And these osteons themselves, each of them have, you can see, a central canal to them. Inside of there is going to be blood vessels and nerves. And then here you can see are the lacunae. What's inside of these lacunae? We said you're going to find your osteocytes because you have three bone cells: osteocytes, which are the mature cells, the osteoblasts, the immature cells which produce the matrix, osteocytes maintain the matrix, and an osteoclast which will break down the bone. All you can see will be basically the osteocytes which would be inside of here. You can't see them, but we know that that's where they'll be found. So same thing here. You grab this osteon. Here's the central canal. Here's all these lacunae. And then in those lacunae, you can see, you'll be able to appreciate then your osteocytes. And you also have a canaliculi. These canaliculi are basically these little tiny cracks, these little hair-like cracks you see here that connect from one lacuna to another. And what they do is they allow these lacunae and the cells to communicate with one another. And they can get nutrients and basically all of that there through them as well. And the last term is lamellae. Lamellae, you'll see, are like the rings on a tree trunk. If we cut the tree and we want to count the age, we count those rings. So you can see right around here, the central canal, you can see you've got one ring, and surrounding that is another ring. So those are the lamellae, these concentric circles, concentric rings that are surrounding the central canal. And that's what you see here, lamellae. All right, next then here, let's move down. Let's talk blood. We talk blood. Blood, description, red and white cells, red and white blood cells, found in a fluid matrix. The fluid matrix is called the plasma. Now the function of blood is it transports. It's transporting a lot of important substances. Gases, nutrients, waste, hormones, right? We can go on and on. Where's blood? Hopefully just within our blood vessels. Right? We don't want it leaking around anywhere. So here you can appreciate the different aspects. As we've mentioned, we've talked about, or we'll see in the lab. Here you can see you've got red blood cells, your erythrocytes, they're also known as, and the backdrop basically where your plasma would be. Okay, and then here you can see you've got various white blood cells. You don't have to know which one is which yet. By the end of the semester, you will. And then platelets you've got there as well. So a little review you can check out. Let's move to muscle tissue. Let's go right to this slide. Now we talk muscle tissue. First, let's talk skeletal muscle. You describe skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscle is going to be broken down to one skeletal muscle cell, one skeletal muscle fiber. One skeletal muscle fiber is going to be, you can see here, a nice long, cylindrical, multinucleate cell. And these cells have these obvious striations we can see here. So that's us pulling one of these cells out and looking at it. And that's what we see here. Now, the function of skeletal muscle is it allows voluntary movement, locomotion, manipulation of the environment, right? I don't want this here. Let me move this from here to there. I don't want this here. I want to put it there. Facial expressions. And it's going to be under voluntary control. Skeletal muscle will be under voluntary control. We voluntarily, consciously control skeletal muscle. Now the location, skeletal muscle cells are going to be found making up skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscle is going to be found attached to bones and occasionally to our skin, mostly to bone. Second, then we have cardiac muscle. Cardiac muscle. Now when we talk cardiac muscle is going to be basically described as branching cells. These are branching cells, also striated, and these are generally uninucleate. And these cells, we said, are going to meet with the next cell at the intercalated discs we described. Right? So they interdigitate. They interdigitate at these specialized junctions. that are called intercalated discs. So when you talk function, cardiac muscle, you'll see its function is as it contracts, it's going to get the heart to move, and when the heart moves, blood is going to move into circulation. So it gets our blood circulating. And it's also going to be, you'll see, under involuntary control, like smooth muscle. It is under involuntary control, right? We don't have any conscious control over it. So where do we find it? In the walls of the heart. In the walls of the heart. And the third then is smooth muscle. Now when we talk smooth muscle is going to be described as basically spindle-shaped cells, having spindle-shaped cells or squamous-shaped cells with a centrally placed nuclei. There's no striations, hence the name smooth muscle. And these cells are going to be arranged closely to form sheets. They form sheets like we saw epithelium. What is the function? The function is of smooth muscle is to propel substances or objects like a baby. Substances, urine or food, okay, or a baby. And it's going to propel these substances along internal passageways. So you find this muscle in your basically hollow visceral organs. This muscle, smooth muscle, is also known as visceral muscle. It's under involuntary control. Involuntary control. So where is it going to be found located? Mostly in the walls of your hollow visceral organs. Let's talk then nervous tissue. When we talk nervous tissue is going to be made up of neurons. Neurons are going to be branching cells. They have these cell processes that can be quite long, and they extend from the nucleus containing cell body, as you see. Also contributing to nervous tissue are non-irritable supporting cells. And you can see their nuclei here. When we go to nervous system, we'll cover every single one of them. So here you can see one neuron. You've got the cell body or the soma, which contains, you can see the nucleus, along with that, the usual organelles inside of there. And then you've got these various cell processes. You've got dendrites here, the shorter, tapering, branching looking structures. And then here you can see your axon. One axon, many dendrites. What's the function of these cells? They transmit electrical signals from our sensory receptors to our effectors. They transmit electrical signals from our sensory receptors and to our effectors, which are going to control, you can see the activity basically of muscles then and glands. Where do you find nervous tissue? Nervous tissue is going to be found in the brain, in the spinal cord, and also making up nerves. So when we go to the neuron, let's go to this neuron thoroughly. The neuron is the actual cell that transmits signals. It's the truly functioning cell, and they're also less numerous in quantity. So they have a cell body, which is also called the soma, and it contains the nucleus, and within that is the nucleolus. So make sure you understand nucleus contains DNA. Nucleolus is going to be responsible for producing rRNA. Now there's processes here. Processes are going to be slender extensions that branch from the soma. Slender extensions that branch from the soma. The first type I'd like you to know about are dendrites. Dendrites, there's multiple dendrites, and they're the shorter of the two processes. And these dendrites, they receive signals from other neurons. So the signal comes in, and it makes its way over to the cell body to be processed. And then here you have the axon. The axon is the longer process. There's just one per neuron. And they transmit signals away from the cell body to other neurons. So the signal then is going to travel away from the cell body towards the axon terminal and to the next neuron. So the other cells are glial cells. Glial, glial cells you have there, or your neuroglia, your supporting cells, whatever you want to call them there. They're much smaller and more numerous in quantity, and we'll go through them when we get to nervous system. This neuron is the more important cell here. Next, then, let's talk covering and lining epithelium. Covering and lining epithelium. Now, we talk covering and lining epithelium, covering and lining membranes. When we talk covering and lining membranes are considered simple organs. They're considered simple organs. All membranes have epithelial tissue on connective tissue proper. So the first type is cutaneous membrane. We talk description and location. We're talking cutaneous membrane. It's basically your skin. It's attached to a thick layer of connective tissue, the dermis. And it's exposed to the air, and it is a dry membrane. So type of tissue we're going to have here is keratinized, stratified squamous epithelium. So this cutaneous membrane is basically your epidermis. It's basically your epidermis. Next, then, let's talk mucous membranes. Now, we talk mucous membranes. They're described as being a lining membrane. Mucous membranes line all body cavities that open to the exterior. They line all body cavities that open to the body's exterior, to the outside of the body. These are wet or moist membranes. And this type of membrane is adapted for absorption and secretion. It's adapted for absorption and secretion. Now, when you talk tissue type can be either stratified squamous or simple columnar epithelia resting on top of a layer of lamina propria, a layer of connective tissue, loose connective tissue, called lamina propria, loose connective tissue. And then the third type are going to be our serous membranes. Now, we talk serous membranes or serosei. We've discussed them before, right? They're moist membranes. They're going to be found in the closed ventral body cavities, and they are named according to their site and specific organ association, as we saw in the last chapter. You have pleura, you have pericardium, and you have peritoneum, depending on which organ we're talking about, right? Parietal peritoneum, visceral peritoneum, we went through. Parietal pericardium, visceral pericardium. Parietal pleura, visceral pleura. And the tissue type is simple squamous epithelium. We got even more specific, we called it mesothelium. And it's all going to be found resting on areolar connective tissue. Resting on areolar connective tissue. You can see that right down here. Very well. And then up here, we've got mucous membranes.